With authority.
Extra coffee today. Good afternoon.
Welcome, everyone. Today, the Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Local Transportation will come to order. And will the clerk please call the roll for today's attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Steele.
Here.
Representative Slaw.
Present.
Representative Borton.
Here.
Representative DeSena. Representative Robinson.
Present.
Representative Morgan.
Present.
Representative Edwards.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 6 of 7 members who have a quorum.
Thank you, William. Mr. Clerk. Today's committee was called to have the Michigan Department of Transportation, also known as MDOT, present on their procedures of road building. The presentation will provide a detailed breakdown of the road building process and provide the committee with a clearer understanding of the planning, execution, financial management behind the infrastructure projects. So that being said, the committee welcomes Greg Bruner, the Chief Operations Officer and Chief Engineer for MDOT. And Mr. Bruner, whenever you're ready, please take a seat. And I know that you have a hard stop in 45 minutes, and so I'm hoping to get you out and on your way.
Perfect. I know I'm doing 4 presentations today. This is number 3, so that'll be my next one. But again, thank you for having me here today. I'm Greg Brenner, MDOT's Chief Operations Officer, and this presentation is going to be kind of a high-level overview of MDOT in terms of how we're organized, what we do from a construction standpoint, how we plan projects, and then how we oversee the construction throughout that entire process. I have about 30 slides here, so we can do this. I can run through them all, or if you have questions on any of the slides as we go, feel free to ask. Because I know there's going to be a lot of information to cover here. So with the Michigan Department of Transportation, the way we're organized at a high level, of course, we have our director that's appointed by the governor, but then we have 5 different bureaus: finance, planning, field services, Bureau of Bridges and Structures, and development. So the finance and planning are relatively self-explanatory. Field services, they're the ones that kind of oversee construction and maintenance and operations for the entire state. Kind of the experts. Bureau of Development, that would be the folks that do all of our real estate design work. And then the Bureau of Bridges and Structures, of course, oversees our bridge inventory and the bridge construction projects. And kind of those bureaus at a high level provide statewide guidance and policy. They're the ones that work with a lot of the industries to have that engagement, and then provide a lot of policies and directions to our regions. MDOT itself has 7 different regions around the state, which are shown on the map here, and then 23 what we call Transportation Service Centers, or TSCs. And more or less, those are strategically placed around the state, so they're within about an hour of anywhere in the state, where if they do have to have meetings with customers, kind of that's where a lot of those meeting locations are. That's the areas that have kind of the day-to-day relationships with the locals and counties, kind of for projects and anything else transportation related. So when you start talking about transportation overall, though, it really ties to the economy of Michigan. When you start looking at some of the stats here, 35% of all U.S.-Canada trade flows through Michigan, which is surprising that we only have a couple international crossings here. But again, that's where a majority of all the economy comes through is our state, which is a good place to be. About $944 billion in freight is moved each year through Michigan. That's on our highways, rail, air, and water ports, and trucking accounts for about 74% of that by tonnage moved through Michigan. And again, transportation itself just is vital to the tourism we have in the state, where we get about $30 billion a year in tourist costs. So when you start talking about the transportation system in general, this is for all state roads, county roads, local roads. There's about 122,000 miles of roads in Michigan, almost 12,000 bridges across the state. When you start looking at inventory overall, Michigan ranks about 10th of all the states in terms of number of lane miles. So we are a large state when it comes to transportation. And then that's broken down, as many of you know, by, of course, MDOT oversees a lot of our state routes, then the counties and locals oversee some of the routes that they own throughout the state. When we start talking about asset management, that's managed by our Transportation Asset Management Council, which has membership from all of these different areas. They're the ones that kind of assess road conditions to keep us aligned across the board, so we can do apples-to-apples comparisons of our inventory. Now, when we start talking about the road network overall, just to break it down a little bit, some of that is federal aid eligible. So the top section of pie charts here shows about 70% isn't federal aid eligible, but 30% of all roads are. And what that does, though, you can see that orange as you follow it through, that accounts for about 95% of all commercial traffic goes on federal aid eligible roads, and almost 90% of all traffic is on those same federal eligible roads. And that federal aid eligible roads are a mix between state and local roads. The pie charts below that, you can see that about 92% of all roads in Michigan are county or city roads, with 8% being MDOT roads. But when you start looking at MDOT roads or carrying that pie across, that's about 80% of all commercial traffic, and about 50% of all traffic is what the Michigan Department of Transportation handles on our inventory. So this kind of breaks down what MDOT oversees. We have about 10,000 miles of road, 4,800 bridges, and of course, rest areas, roadside parks, lots of other assets along the way. And I know when people think about MDOT, they usually just think about like the interstate, like I-75 or 696 or whatever else, but we also oversee our US routes and M routes across the state. And so again, that's kind of defines what we do as one of those signs, but when I start saying things like M1 or US 24 or M53, you may not know what those are, but it's the same road when I say Woodward, Telegraph, Van Dyke, those types of roads. So a lot of state roads are the ones that are considered main streets through lots of small communities throughout the state. They may not have that M designation. You may just know it as Main Street or whatever else, but those are all the roads that MDOT itself oversees, and the rest are kind of divided up between counties and locals from there. So what we do is a lot of the construction we perform is by low bid. So we put together a set of plans that goes out to contractors with pay items, and it's a federal requirement for the most part that we do low bid contracts for industry for construction. And when we start talking about the workforce and kind of how we accomplish that, it's divided up between MDOT employees and then consultants. So that kind of, we don't have enough FTEs in our department to be able to cover all those things, so that's where we utilize consultants to come in and kind of help with some of the peaks that we see. Roughly, it's about 50% of the work is done by private consulting firms across the state for us throughout the year. That fluctuates depending on where our program is at. The other big thing we do is perform maintenance on our roadways, and this is where Michigan's different than any other state in the country. As you can see by this map, anything that's blue is where we pay the County Road Commission to perform maintenance on our roadways, so they'll be the ones that are out plowing snow, patching potholes, doing those types of things. And about a third of the roads on here, the white ones, are where we have MDOT garages that handle that task. The light blue ones, kind of there's a mix of two that do it, but overall, that's different than other states. States like Wisconsin, they pay their county roads commissions to maintain their entire system, whereas other states like Ohio or Indiana around us, they do the entire system themselves. So we're probably the only hybrid state that I'm aware of across the country that approaches maintenance from this standpoint. But again, we have a good relationship with Cray, and again, work to get that done. When we start talking about border crossings and big bridges in Michigan, we're involved in quite a few of those. This chart just kind of breaks that down a little bit more. The International Bridge in the Sioux, they have an independent authority that's staffed. Their staffing and their authority is half US, half Canadian. But MDOT is involved there in terms of their human resources, their hiring, those types of things, as well as overall budget. The Mackinac Bridge is an independent authority as well, where MDOT's involved with HR and their overall budget for them. Blue Water Bridge is slightly different, where Michigan owns out to the very center of the bridge, and Canada owns the other half of the bridge, which is kind of odd when I worked there because we do our projects to paint out to the very middle, and then they'd handle the other side. So it was a different approach, but it works good. We have a great relationship with them at that structure. The Ambassador Bridge, of course, is privately owned and operated, and within the next 6 months, we'll have the Gordie Howe International Bridge will be opening up too. And again, that's an independent authority, but we work closely with them. But Canada's doing a lot of the HR and oversight on that project. So each of those is unique in their own way, but it's definitely an interesting approach to the way we handle those assets across the state. So next slide goes over transportation funding overall. This is strictly the Michigan Transportation Fund, the MTF, kind of where the dollars come from and where they go. So when it comes to state road user fees, the majority of what we get's from vehicle registration and gas tax. I think and diesel tax. Everyone's kind of aware of that. But more recently, there's been other income tax coming in, and some of the marijuana tax heads that way as well. So our total state MTF revenue is right around $3.8 billion a year. And then that's supplemented with some federal aid for routes as well. How that's broken down, this is by law. It's about 75% of that goes to, or I'm sorry, Act 51. Got ahead of myself. Act 51, about 55% of the MTF goes to local and county roads. The remainder goes to MDOT roads. And when it comes to the federal aid itself, by law, this is where I was going to talk about, 75% goes to MDOT and 25% goes to the local roads. When we start talking about pavement condition, this is just kind of a high level where we're at right now. So this looks back to 2015, and as many of you are aware, we had our Rebuilding Michigan program, the governor's bond financing program. So as you can see, once we hit about 2020, you can see that our road condition kind of perked up a little bit right there. Again, this is a financing program, and based on how we're projecting pavement conditions going forward, this is kind of the blue line is what we anticipate it'll be, assuming there's no changes to funding, but I know those discussions are kind of ongoing right now, but that's where we are as of today. Now, when we start talking about projects overall in the department, we try to be as transparent as we can with folks. MDOT puts out a 5-year program every year. I have the link to the website on here. This runs through all the programs we do, all the projects we have once they're established as projects. But we do start a process called scoping a couple years probably before this comes out, and that's where we really start looking at what are we going to do as part of that project. Is it going to be a reconstruct? Are we going to add lanes? Are we going to change things around? And that's where we really get involved with the locals on that time, in that time frame, a lot of the stakeholders, to get their input to make sure it's the right project for the right place to keep people happy. I know when I was working at one of our transportation service centers, I'd tell them, we finally got money to fix your road. And they're like, so you're gonna be here this summer? I'm like, no, it's in our 5-year plan. So we'll be here in 5 years, but we want to stay engaged through that process to help get you there. So again, we're being transparent in terms of what we do, but it's very important that we get that local engagement early on. And that's kind of the role of our transportation service centers, to have that, be that open line of communication with a lot of our customers. Now, hopping a little more into the project side of things, this is a high-level project life cycle. And I already talked about kind of at the top with scoping. So once projects are scoped and approved, that's when the design starts. That's when our engineers start doing all the blueprints, specifications, everything else. Once that design is completed, then they move on to advertisement, which is where we put them out to bid to contractors. So when we do that, we put it out for, depending on the project, it's usually 6 weeks. We can go as short as 3 weeks if it's a small project. But that's where contractors then can review those, ask questions if they have any, and then put together their bids for the letting. So the letting is when they actually submit their costs. And as I mentioned before, we use a low bid system. Once we have those costs that they come in, we do what's called unbalanced bid review. The way our contracts are set up is they're broken down by pay items. So we'll pay, it's not just a bottom line dollar. We'll pay like $100 per ton of asphalt, X number of dollars for concrete curb. Everything's broken down. All those, they bid on each one of those tasks, and those are all summed up. So the unbalanced bid review, what that does is looks at each of those individual pay items to make sure what was bid on it is in relative alignment to our engineer's estimate, to make sure things aren't lopsided or they've messed around with the bids or things like that. Assuming that's all good, that's when we go on to the award. And that's where we actually award the contract to one of the contractors to come in and do the work. From that's following this part is what people actually see in the field then when construction starts, where we are out, we have an inspector out in the field to make sure the contractor's handling or performing the work properly in alignment with the specifications, alignment with the plans, make sure they're getting paid. And then we have a process of what's called project closeout. That's when the road's back open to traffic, all the paperwork's complete, everybody's in agreement, the contract's done, and kind of sign off on things. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how it all works, about as fast as I can tell you. But another big thing we deal with is permitting. When it comes down to project permitting, there's 2 main agencies we deal with. First is SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. And they look at a lot of the projects we do to make sure we aren't really changing the historical significance of any of the areas that this project's going through. And the other one is EGLE, both from kind of a environmental side, they're involved in the permitting there, but also like reviewing what we do for soil erosion, other types of things. So if there's washouts on the project from rainstorm that it doesn't get into our rivers and waterways out there. So permitting, those are the two main agencies we deal with. But MDOT also plays a role in permitting overall, which you may hear about. Some of those are for permits in right-of-way construction, where if somebody wants to install, say they want to install build a fast food restaurant on one of our routes, we'd give them a driveway permit to kind of construct that out on the freeway to make sure that it meets all of our requirements and most importantly, it's safe for the area. The other main permit we do is transport permits, and those ones are more related to if you're driving down the road, you see the trucks that have wide load on them, or like the picture here where you can see the windmill blade that you may see going down the road once in a while. We give permits to those types of vehicles, and what we're doing by giving those permits is just making sure they're not driving through a construction zone where lanes are narrow, they aren't overweight, they aren't going over a load-restricted bridge or other types of things, running through neighborhoods, those kinds of things where we analyze all the routes. And again, we have goals associated with those just to make sure everything is going okay. When it comes back to kind of the more construction project side of things, it's really a balancing act between the MDOT and the contractors on these projects. MDOT provides the contract specifications where we'd say that the paving has to meet these types of requirements or be 95% density or whatever else. The contractor's responsibility here is they control the means and methods. We don't tell them how to build things. We just tell them that whatever they build has to meet these requirements. And so that's kind of where the balance is. Then we just make sure that they're following federal requirements overall, that they're pre-qualified, they understand the process, they have sufficient labor, they comply with lots of the federal and state laws that are out there and any federal prevailing wage requirements that may be tied to the project. A big part of what we do is partnerships with the construction industry. Overall, there's 5 key industries that we deal with. Typically, that's the MITA, the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, the Aggregate Association, the Asphalt Association, Concrete Association, and Road Preservation Association. And what we do, we have quite a few meetings with those folks at a very high level. We have an executive quarterly meeting with each of them where we're all in the same room to talk about transportation issues and what we can do better. But then we also have more detailed meetings with each of those to kind of dive down into some of the specifications and other things we do. And of course, even at a lower level, we'll have project meetings directly with the contractors, specifically those types of things. But it's something we're very engaged with the industry throughout the process. So what we do is oversight of the contractor work. So as you're driving by construction jobs, you'll see an MDOT truck out there or two, or a consultant truck out that's doing just that, oversight of the project to make sure they're being built in compliance with a lot of our specifications or the design plans, measuring quantities, making sure that any materials come out, meet what our requirements are, collecting tickets, those types of things. And then we're also involved in the quality assurance side of testing, just to make sure what comes out there tests to meet all our requirements. And then, like I had mentioned, just kind of the measurement and payment to make sure the contractor is getting paid for the work they did out there. Like I had mentioned, we do use consultants to oversee a part of that work. It's right around half of our construction work is overseen by consultants. And one of the big things that we've been recognized for as a DOT is a lot of the innovations we're doing here. Probably the biggest one, which we started doing probably about 10 years ago, is called e-construction. So if you remember back in the old days of construction, you used to have that big set of construction plans that would be handed out. Right now, we do everything electronically. We got rid of the paper so that all plans go out electronically, all the documents, the approvals, those types of things are paperless. It's been a huge savings for us and something that a lot of other states are looking at as they continue to implement this. There's still a lot of DOTs around that still rely on those old paper sheets, but there are quite a few other things that we've worked on from an innovation standpoint that I won't go into a ton of detail here, but I can take questions on. When you start looking at MDOT construction project oversight, this just shows kind of the original project cost compared to the final project cost. And as you can see by looking at these, the majority of the years that are out there, all of our final project costs are, for the most part, within less than 1% of our original project costs. We show that to other states, and they can't believe it. When you start talking to other states around the country, they're at 10%, 15% difference. And a lot of that ties to both our relationships we have with industry, as well as the specifications that we put out and how well we oversee those to kind of follow the process throughout. So this is something we're very proud of. I know the State Transportation Commission is also. So again, just to kind of keep things in perspective that we aren't running into a ton of construction overruns or other types of issues as things are being built. So what we do is we have pavement and material standards as well in terms of pavement designs. Lots of the questions I get asked are, how come this road's concrete, or why don't you put asphalt down here? We make that selection by following what's called the life cycle cost analysis law. So any project that's over $1.5 million of pavement costs, we go through a process where we analyze the cost of construction using both concrete and asphalt. It takes into account the means and methods of construction, as well as the long-term maintenance required for whatever pavement selection is chosen. Bottom line, that spits out a number, kind of an overall estimate of each of those material types. If they are within 10%, we'll do what's called an alternate bid, where we bid both of them. If it's over that, then we'd go, of course, with the selected, whichever one, if it's asphalt or concrete, shorter or lower cost long-term there. So again, this also involves lots of dealing with the industry. This process is talked about quite a bit, but we do go through an extensive process every 4 years with them to make sure, work out any bugs, if things have come up or other types of changes need to be made based on where we're at as an industry. That's their opportunity to provide us additional input. So that's kind of the secret sauce in terms of how we choose asphalt or concrete on our roads. One other big thing we do is that we're recognized nationally for is our capital preventive maintenance program. What that is we don't necessarily use a worst first approach to our roads. We don't wait for a road to get bad that we just go rip the whole thing out and put it back in. We use this capital preventive maintenance approach or CPM for short, to do short-term repairs, whether they're crack sealing, it might be a one course of asphalt over the top or other types of things, just to extend the life out overall. We may get questions sometimes, you were just out here 5 years ago repaving this road, how come you're coming back to do it? And that's just following kind of this preventive maintenance approach. It's like with your roof, if one shingle blows off your roof, you're not gonna just say, I'll just let it go and wait till the whole roof is bad, where you have to replace the whole thing, you're just gonna go fix that one shingle, right? Similar approach to roads, and that's how we do kind of what we call CPM. In terms of standards, and how we build roads, lots of the questions we get are, you guys have been building roads the same for 30 years, which is definitely not the case. We set up standards that follow federal guidance, so we're at where other states are, if not better, when it comes to standards for construction. A lot of that includes warranties on our projects, which is also part of Public Act 175 of 2015. I'll talk about warranties a little bit more coming up, but again, it gets down to specifications and where materials are available around the state. One of the other things that comes up quite a bit too is looking at new materials. We all get questions from vendors in terms of, I have this fancy new product that's gonna save the day. So we have a new material and product review process that runs through lots of our statewide experts. They look at the material, look how it's performed, look at a lot of the engineering that goes into it to see if it's something that would work here. That's how we select a lot of these new materials. They make that decision on if we can do it or implement it, try it, and if it works good, then we can expand it from there. We also work with industry on what are called pavement demonstration projects, where we look at new ways to build roads. Some of them we've done like a project where we looked at European pavement, where it's much thicker design than we use here in Michigan, to see how that performed. We've looked at like 30 and 50-year pavement projects in Flint and Grand Rapids, where again, those were also thicker pavements, just to see how they worked out, and from a long-term standpoint, if it makes sense to go that route. We do a legislative report every year that kind of walks through each of our different demonstration projects and how they're performing, what's going on with them, so I can provide that if there are any questions on any of those projects. The other thing we do is warranties. That started in 1997 with the Public Act, was updated in 2016. When you start looking at warranties overall, we have about 5,000 warranties to date on construction projects around the state. About 600 of those are active, and when it comes to warranties, typically there's a process where we go out and evaluate them once construction's complete, and there's thresholds if it's acceptable or not. What we're seeing in a lot of our warranties is about 12% of those projects require some sort of corrective action. It's not going to be to reconstruct the whole road, but it may be to go out and perform certain types of maintenance to get it into the good shape to meet those warranty thresholds that are part of the contract. And when you start talking about warranties, I know most people think of warranties as when you go to Best Buy to buy a refrigerator or whatever else you want to buy the extended warranty on this. And you can go either way with warranties. The way we have them set up, though, is they're set up more as a risk transfer for us to the consultants, or I'm sorry, contractors. There's two different kinds we use. The first is materials and workmanship. That's going to be what we use kind of on a lot of the reconstruction type projects, because we can only warrant the materials they brought in and kind of how they built it, since they're controlling the means and methods. We told them they had to build 8 inches of concrete. So again, if that fails because of the pavement thickness that we designed, that would be something that's on us. But if it's tied to the materials and workmanship, that is the part that's warranted for those contracts. And then we also have performance warranties for a lot of our smaller CPM type projects where it may be a small overlay. Bridge painting is another one that has a performance warranty where we go out a couple years after our bridge is painted to look at it to make sure that's performing adequately. Again, these next two slides just kind of talk about the road and bridge warranty program, how long those are. For the materials and workmanship, those are typically 3 to 5 years, and where we keep those contracts open to go out and look at them to make sure things are performed as expected. And the performance ones are typically 2 to 3 years. And with that, kind of, this runs through the whole as quick as I could do it. I know I've been talking fast here, so I hope you're keeping up, but kind of runs through what we get to at the end of the project with the warranty acceptance. That's when we get to the very end where, if you remember back to one of my first slides, project closeout, that's where we kind of close the books on the project and move on and just move it into kind of our normal maintenance program to kind of extend the life, keep things going. Moving forward. So I know I talked a lot there, so I can take questions on anything that I talked about there or any other questions tied to MDOT.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and I appreciate you taking the time. I know we just gave you a list of what we wanted to talk about last week, so thank you for that. So I guess the first question, it would be Representative Slaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for doing the presentation. Can you talk to me a little bit about the whole low bid thing? I've obviously bought things in the past, and low bid is not necessarily quality bid, and so I'm just wondering how you, and I understand that might be the way that you're documenting it or something like that, but I'd love to have you explain to me how low bid is our best bid, and is it always true?
All right, sure. Well, there are we do quality-based selections too for certain types of innovative contracts, which I can talk about for a second after that, but our standard process is low bid. So what we do is we break things down by pay items. So there's going to be a pay item to mobilize all your equipment out there, a pay item for each of the barrels, construction barrels we put out for barrier wall, blah, blah, blah. And for each of those pay items, there's specifications that the contractor has to meet. So what the low bid approach does is, assuming they meet all the specifications for each of those, it levels the playing field, where at a minimum, they have to meet all these expectations for the density of the asphalt we put out, the type of fill they put in, all those types of things. And with the low bid approach, they bid on each of those pay items and sum them up at the bottom. So what we are doing, it's not really a quality-based solution, because from a quality standpoint, we set what those specifications are they have to meet. And so that's the approach that we use for probably 95% of our projects, is that low bid approach, knowing that these are all pre-qualified contractors, they know our business, they know our specifications. If they don't meet the specifications, we'll have them rip it out and kind of rebuild it there. So that cost is on them, so they're very conscious about that, to meet those specifications and have a successful project throughout. And again, those specifications are based on national standards. So what the low bid system does is levels the playing field, so everyone's bidding on the exact same specifications. And then kind of by summing up all those different pay items, that's how you get to that overall low bid number. Does that explain it? Okay. And then we do quality-based selections for other types of projects that we call more innovative projects where, like for design-build projects, where we may only design the plans to 30% done. And then we hire a contractor consultant team to come in, put together a proposal and cost in terms of how they're going to do that, how they're going to work together to kind of finish the design, stay engaged with the locals from that standpoint. So those are more the exception probably to our projects than the majority of them, which are low bid based, but it's strictly for innovative contracts is how we do it. And that follows federal law that we have to do the low bid for the majority of those unless they're innovative.
Thank you for that. The next question, I have the next question on the list, but how often does the department have to pause or stop regarding the SHPO permits or Eagle? And, you know, we went and looked at a project last year, and there was mating birds along I-96, and the freeway was done here, and the freeway was done there, and we had to wait for that mating season to be completed to be able to finish that. And I just can't, the staggering amount of money that had to be for that requirement. So, so I'm just curious on how delayed do you get between those two
Well, I
departments?
can't control birds mating, but no, typically a lot of those, we work with Eagle and SHPO early on for some of those requirements. And, you know, there are requirements based on birds mating or fish spawning seasons or other types of environmental activities that happen out there. And by working with them early on in the project development side when it's being designed, we then utilize that to set our construction schedules, which are what go out to bid. So if it's a bridge over a river that has some type of fish spawning, we may push that start of construction date rather than starting right when the snow breaks. We may push that back to July or something to avoid any work in the water because of fish spawning or other environmental concerns that may be there. I'd say what you encountered out there was probably more the exception than the rule. It's not too often we have to stop construction from something like that. And without knowing that instance specifically, I can't go into much more detail, but we try to account for that early on by being engaged with SHPO and Eagle.
So that was my question. It wasn't that specific. That was just an example, but how often that you might be delayed because of those.
Yeah,
So,
no, it's not too often from that standpoint.
Representative Robinson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask two questions? They're short. First has to do with sewer and water lines underneath. What warrants whether that's going to be part of a project, and how often is it part of a project?
A lot of that depends on the project. For most of the water and sewer line, I assume you mean sanitary sewer or storm sewer?
Yes.
All right. So sanitary sewer and water main, those are more municipal-owned utilities. We don't really own those, but what happens if we are doing a construction project where we are ripping out the road, we do everything we can to work with them if they have any plans in the future of replacing water mains so that we don't have to build our road this year and then come back next year and do a big cut down the middle so that they install a water main. And a lot of that gets back to what I had talked about earlier by getting them involved 5-7 years in advance of the project. So financially, they can plan to incorporate it into that type of project. With sewer lines, those are more, for the most part, to handle a lot of the roadway water that we create. So we incorporate those into projects that are any kind of major drainage changes to them or profile changes. Again, we don't want to, when we're scoping a project, we look at those types of things. If sewers under the roadway are in bad condition, we want to replace them while we're replacing the road.
And my second question has to do with the project that you guys, I think, is it completed, the Mound project completed or almost completed?
The Mound Road project?
Yeah, from 696 to M53?
Mound Road is, that's a county road.
Okay, so you guys weren't responsible for that?
The way it works for some of those county road projects is if they're federal aid, we have a local agency programs unit. For federal aid projects, MDOT has to let the projects, but the county's responsible for overseeing the project.
Regardless, here's my question, because in that project, there was material used that was the latest traffic and safety technology for high performance. And I'm curious about that.
Innovate
because
Mound?
I'm sorry?
Innovate Mound?
Yes.
Yep.
By the way, whoever did that, great job. But my question is, moving forward, is that something that we're going to put in the roads, that smart technology? And if so, how much extra does that cost on top of a road project to have that kind of material? Thank you.
I wish there was an easy answer to that question when you start talking about costs, because it all depends on how much you want to put in. I know that Innovate Mound got a large grant, and I can't talk in great details because it's the county's responsibility on that project, but we are doing things at the department to make work zones and the roadways smarter, safer. We're doing a project with a company called Cavnew on I-94, kind of over by the airport, where they're going to be managing a lane for us, where they are installing that technology. If you drive through, it's about a 3-mile pilot right now, but they're looking at extending that out past the airport to install new technology throughout the entire roadway to kind of make it this nation's first autonomous vehicle smart roadway through there. So those are ongoing, kind of at the pilot state, but we are doing things larger right now. In terms of communication with construction, where we're implementing soon smart aero boards is what we're calling them, and doing pilots with Michigan companies called Haas Alert, where they can install something in our trucks where once we flip a switch, it talks to in-vehicle navigation systems in Stellantis, Volkswagen, Apple Maps, Waze, those types of things, just to know that there's going to be construction ahead. It pops up on all those in-vehicle navigation systems to hopefully, get people's eyes back on the road. So we have a lot of different things going on with technology. There's a different one we're working in the Metro Detroit area on wrong way driving with the issues we're seeing down there to send out alerts when the system notices somebody got on the freeway going the wrong way in an effort to kind of prevent some of those horrific crashes that are happening. And MDOT's involved also nationally with, those projects are called Intelligent Transportation or ITS system projects. We're involved nationally with ITS America, and then I'll also be speaking at ITS Canada coming up, just because MDOT is really in that space, and with all the automakers being here, we want to be kind of in tune with them. And there's some other things going on with the Council of Future Mobility and Electrification that MDOT is a part of, but I'm probably going way off topic here, but yes, we're very involved in new technology, the roadways.
That'll be another meeting, I'm sure. Rep. Morgan?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for scheduling this presentation. I think this is really important and great, and I have not seen a thorough presentation like this on how we build our roads and how we maintain them. My question is specific a little bit to the maintenance of the roads. So the question is, when we look at partnering with local agencies to maintain the state roads, I'm curious if we're adequately compensating them for that maintenance. Sometimes there's tension in my community where somebody says, well, that road's falling apart. Yes, it is, but there are also things you can do to better maintain it so that it falls apart a little more slowly or is more manageable as it's falling apart. But there's sort of this back and forth, oh, it's a state road, oh, but it's managed by, the maintenance is managed by the county, and there's sort of just fingers pointing different directions, but nobody ever really gives me an answer on like, okay, how do I get this road to be better maintained until it gets replaced?
Yeah, so some of those fall back on the TAMC, the Transportation Asset Management Council, that's looking at an overall asset management standpoint to roads, and I can talk about asset management for another hour if you want, but at a very high level, I think to your question, people in Michigan don't care who owns the road. They just want to drive on a good road, and how can we better coordinate that? When we start, the slide I showed on maintenance where you said this is an MDOT road, but the county maintains it, those types of questions. For maintenance, that is not really down to some of the more significant fixes you may see out there, like repaving the roadway or those types of things. It's more about pothole patching, plowing snow, or maybe a concrete patch here or there. Those types of things are what we consider maintenance, where the counties would get involved on our roadways to be able to do that. When you start looking, though, each of those contracts is slightly different in terms of who performs what maintenance. So we may have a county that performs all that maintenance out there, but MDOT does all the sign maintenance and the bridge maintenance on that road. So it's tough to come up with an apples-to-apples comparison, but by working with groups like TAMC and others, looking at how can we extend the life of those assets out there through capital preventive maintenance fixes that I had talked about previously, like thin overlays or other types of things where I hire a contractor to come in and do it, doing the right fix at the right time. Again, just sharing that expertise. Again, the council looks at that. There's other conferences around where they can share that information too through CRAE or MML.
Chair, can I just clarify a little bit? Yeah, just so I understand, I think I'm talking about exactly what you talked about. So the, like, patching the potholes,
Yep.
things like that, that sometimes don't seem to be done, but it's kind of hard to figure out who to ask because of who's maintaining it. And then it just seems, my understanding is, it seems like maybe we're not compensating the locals enough to cover the full maintenance cost, or they just aren't doing it. I don't know which is which. But I'm curious, like, how do we help with that?
Well, when it comes, a lot of that just comes down to dollars or available dollars. Everybody has a budget they have to maintain. So if you're calling if it's an MDOT road and you call a transportation service center, we have somebody that will answer the phone that is in charge of that county maintenance contract. So if potholes need to be patched on I-75, they coordinate to make sure that work happens. But again, when it gets to patching potholes, that's not gonna make a road last forever. That's to make it last for another week until that comes back out. So even with more dollars strictly from that maintenance standpoint, that's not really the silver bullet to keep things going. Our goal with maintenance as a department is to hold the road together until we can come in with a capital project, whether it's a reconstruct or a capital preventive maintenance project, like I had talked about, just to extend the overall life, keep things safe out there. And it's confusing that we have capital preventive maintenance and maintenance, because, I don't know. So that's why we call one CPM, because MDOT loves acronyms.
Thank you. And I'm just going to close with one last question, is the asset management. And who determines, I mean, do you have an asset management department that determines, okay, now we have to do 22, next year we have to do 55, next year we have to do, I mean, is that how it's done? And then you work 5 years out in that respect?
Sure. We look at a lot of the information for those types of project selections and what we do comes from the regions or offices, because they're the one driving those roads every day. They know what needs to be done. At a higher level, we do have an asset management section that looks more globally at what we do, and kind of they'd be the ones to define for a region. Maybe this year you need to do 15% of your projects need to be reconstruct. 60% need to be major rehabilitation, and then the remainder, just capital preventive maintenance type fixes, is kind of how it's done. So at a high level, that's set up centrally, but then more down at the local levels, that's what determines kind of how things really need to work.
Okay, great. I think that we're on time for you. So thank you very much for your presentation. And we hope to have MDOT back here. And so we have no more further questions. So Mr. Bruner, you are excused, but I do have one little order of business that I missed at the beginning. So Representative Robinson moves to adopt the minutes of the March 5th meeting. Okay, there being no objections, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. And thanks again for coming today, and thanks again for MDOT, and we can hardly wait to have you keep coming back with the different departments and go over more of what MDOT does for the state of Michigan. So
Thanks for having me, I appreciate it.
with no further business before the committee, we will be adjourned.